I'm going to be working on now is another sunset, but this one with water in the front with a reflection coming down into it and some hills across the back. I'm always having to say, how am I going to start this? How am I going to work on this? Am I going to do 2 colors or 3 colors? And my feeling is that I think I'm still going to stick with 2 colors like we did on the last one. This is where the sun is. There's white hot in the middle of that, going out to yellow, going out to new gamboge, going out to orange, and then there's some yellow white streaks up in here. There's yellow that runs down into here. There's orange. So we're going to ignore the mountains for now. We're going to ignore any of the blues for now, and we're just going to be thinking about where the yellows and the oranges are. So I've mixed up my Aurelian yellow. I've just added water to my little pile of it here because I didn't have a huge amount. So we've got a nice little pile of that. I've got some new gamboge mixed up, and then I have a mixture of new gamboge and quinacridone rose mixed here. And I can always pull more quinacridone rose into it, and knowing that these grays are going to happen when I do my blue layer. And the same with down in here, the blues are going to come into this, and so I need to leave some lighter spaces down in here so these blues stand out more. And where the blues are up in here, once again, I need to have those as light spaces so that when the blue goes on, it'll look like blue. This still could have a little touch of yellow in underneath of there because that blue has got a little greenish tone to it. This blue up here starts going into a gray. So it could have a tiny bit of pink in underneath of there. Right, so I'm going to set this out of the way. We'll still be able to see it, but you won't be able to see it as well up in the video. So I'm going to just put that up into there. My step number 1 was to draw on where the horizon was going to be, where the mountains were going to be. And this is the one time when I'll use a ruler. So I did carefully measure how far up from the bottom. So that is 3.5 inches, and this should be 3.5 inches as well. And then I did the line across through here. So not with this ruler, a little bit longer one, to get a nice clean horizon line, because that's the one thing when you're doing a bay scene or an ocean scene, the horizon needs to be straight. If it isn't, your viewer is gonna feel uncomfortable. It's gonna feel like something's wrong. So that one thing to try and get happen. I was out walking in the breeze today, and I think my allergies have kicked in just a little bit, so I've got just a little hoarse voice, so don't mind me. So I'm pre-wetting. I want to pre-wet so that I can get nice, smooth, wet and wet. If I don't pre-wet, I'd have to come in with a really thin layer of yellow or a thin layer of pink, and I don't really want to do that on either of those. So I'm pre-wetting with clear water. So I put it on one direction, now I'm painting the other direction to make sure that I've covered everything. And then if I've got too much, I can take the excess off the bottom. I want it so that it's got a really lovely sheen throughout the whole page. Now this might buckle a little bit more on me because this was cut from a big sheet. It's not on one of my blocks that's pre-stretched. So hopefully it doesn't buckle too badly. So just a nice little sheen. And now I need to work fairly quickly with everything else. I'm going to start with the yellows, and don't forget I'm going to have a little light space in there too. And let's start with not the new gamboge, but with the Aurelian yellow. So we have a little light space there, and then I can get those yellows. Bring these yellows up. I like this. I like the yellows running across up through there. Fairly pale, and then we'll throw some pinks in there too. And then this yellow continues on down right underneath here, all the way down into there. And maybe some of that yellow needs to be just a little thicker, which is the other good reason that I'm working out of my pan space there, because I can actually get a little thicker yellow with it. And is that white going to be enough? Let's just remember what we did before. Rinse that brush really well, dry it most of the way, and then come back in here and just pick some of this paint off. Rinse that brush again, dry it, pick some of that paint off. because I want a little bit bigger white space. A little bigger white space, a little bigger up here at the top. Okay, rinse that out. Now I'm going to go into the new gamboge and work the edges of this. And down in here, you have either a vertical or horizontal lines in your water reflections. So this is all going to sort of come down this way, and it's glowing out to or more and more orange the further out it gets from that. It's going to come in just a little bit there, glow across. Okay, I'm going to pull this out. We're going to find some of these spaces. I've got a blue area in here that we don't want to get too dark, so I'm going to be careful. And I'm not really going to go very dark up in there with the yellows. They're mostly staying down in this area here. Maybe just a little bit more there. Now into the oranges. It's already starting to dry a little off here on the edges. And when it does, I can tell when it's starting to dry because it my brush marks show a lot more, and I'm getting little hard dry edges there. So let's just come in with paint and really get that wet down. It's a little bit warm today, and although I'm going to leave, once again, it's dry down here in the bottom. We're going to be coming in with blue on top of this, but I think this is thin enough. I might come in and with the brush and just lift a little of that off, but not too much. And then come in with these edges. And there's a little bit of orange right down into there, and across, and then all the way to those edges. Really easy to not get the edges. And this is going to be a little thinner because there's a little more blue happening there. Think about this just a tiny bit. I can't think too much because I got to be painting, and if I stop and really do a thought process, sometimes that slows down my ability to paint. As you can see, sometimes it slows down my ability to talk. And then if you remember that damp rag game, I really like that damp rag game. Let's just come in and do some damp rag on this. And over here too, damp rag. And then maybe these are a little too brushy looking, so let's just take that damp rag across through there. And horizon, I maybe did something that I shouldn't have here. Let's just push some more yellow into here. That will maybe push that away. Ah, yes, I think that's going to work. But I need to thin it just a little bit and pull it down. That yellow of the reflection, there's a little bit of orange right on the horizon, but that's about it. And so that can run across through here. I've shifted to a slightly smaller brush here. Now let's do a little bit more here. And it's a little bit warm today. This is drying relatively fast. I'm coming in with just a little bit of damp water on here because I wanted to, I was feeling like it was drying a little too fast. I'm going to be careful how much damp water, because if I get too much, it's going to cause blossoms. But if I have just a little bit, it's going to take off these hard, dry edges. Okay. And leave that like that. And now up in the sky up above, I'm actually seeing a little bit of pink almost. So let's just make a little pinkier look. And I want this fairly thin. And remember when we did that other one, I can come in with a really thin peachy pink up here where this blue is going to be, and it'll make the blue be a little more gray looking. And especially where those gray clouds are. Gray clouds. I'm going to have to stop here pretty soon. And I have one other thing that I don't like here. And I don't know, I might be too late. I'd be sorry to come in here because this is going to be damper. I'm going to have to take it all the way across here so that I don't end up. And actually, just I'm following the pattern of the water here. I'm going to have to, this was a mistake. Let me add some more paint in here. I need to add more paint because when you come in with a little bit of too wet of paint, all it does is push away the paint that's there and leave white marks. And that's what was going to happen there. And okay. I can continually come in with thicker paint and add it into this, but as soon as I come in with thin paint, it's going to make blossoms. And so I have to be careful about coming back in with too thin of paint. And run some of those. There are going to be, it's so light enough that I'm okay. When I go to put those blues in, it's going to change how that looks. Now I also feel like, where's my dampness on this damp rag? This needs to be softened. There we go. Yeah, get those edges off. Let's soften that. Come in with my slightly damp rag and just lift across through there to clean those edges and soften that. Keep those little hard spots from showing. And here's another one right here. Damp rag. And I can do it even here. And that's going to be a white spot there, so let's just get some paint into there from the bit on my rag. And I think we're pretty close to being at a point where I should just stop while I'm ahead. Stop while I'm ahead. Nice glow coming down. No, don't do it, Margaret. You can come in later and do that. Do just a little tiny bit. And then I'm going to drag it with that rag. Drag it with the rag. That works. Okay. I think I need to stop. So I've got my nice yellowy oranges in here. This is all going to dry. I'll come back with some blues and work my blues in here later. So I'm going to stop at this point, let it dry. So now that this is dried, we're ready to start on the next layer of it. We've got some nice little bits of yellow up in here, nice little bits of orange. There's a couple of places that I'm going to, down in the water, that I'm going to want to adjust. The sky, I think, is pretty much together, except for now we're going to come in with the blue layer. But down in this water, I put some new gamboge here, but I'm feeling like this orange really needs to come over a little further because we want the reflection of where the sun is to be right underneath of it, and it feels like it's over here a little too far. So let me get that much taken care of, and then we'll let that dry while I start working on the blues up above. And I have some of this orange mixed from the other day when I started this. So this was a mixture of new gamboge and a quinacridone rose. And before I start putting that on, it's a little bigger piece here to work with. I want to sort of see what color this is. And yes, that feels like it's going to be just about right. Get a little bit more water on my brush, pick this up, and find it here. And I have to be careful that what I do here is not going to end up, with funny lines on the right-hand side. My horizon is right in there. We're going to be putting those dark hills in, so I don't have to be right on that horizon. Actually, it might be better if I come up and over it just a little tiny bit. There is a nice little orange line right at that horizon, too. And this needs to be that far away. It's very soft, just a little bit out of focus. So I'm going to soften that edge just a tiny bit. Okay, now let's keep working here before this dries out. There's my white. I want to run pretty much right underneath of there. So let me just go ahead and drop that down like that, and then I'm going to break that. There's some little uneven lines. The further away you are from the water, the closer those little pieces of waves are going to be. So I need to be careful here as I do this, that up in here we want those little wave bits to be relatively close together and pretty soft. And as they get further down here, they're actually going to pass all the way through in a few places. Don't want this really even. We want it a little uneven. The wave that came through here is another one there. And so they're working their way across. And I want to soften that edge. This edge needs to be very soft. Just a dry brush, almost dry brush, very slightly damp brush. Just to soften that in, and then feed that back into there just a little further. And once again, all my brush strokes that I'm doing are running parallel with the horizon, so that this is going to feel like water waves running through there. And when I come in with the blue, we're going to emphasize that even more. So I'm feeling like that little bit of lifting that I did sort of affected that. So I'm coming back in from the other side and just bringing it in toward that. And I like that better now. And down in here. And to see, yeah, a little deeper orange. Quinacridone rose. There's a little bit deeper orange over in here in places. Maybe if I do this as a dry brush, it's going to work better. Okay. And then the blue is going to come in on top of that. And now over in this side, I think I've got this side pretty good. All right. Anywhere else that needs to get a little bit of work? Maybe these clouds right up in here could go a little more intense. I want that yellow to still stand. And I want those edges to just get softened out. So sort of doing a little dry brush on the edges just to make them look a little more natural. Okay, I think we should stop on that. And now for that sky. The sky is varying. It's a perfect. I need to bring this down here because you couldn't see it all on the video. The sky down here is a little paler, and because it's a little paler, it's picking up more of the yellow from underneath of there, and you get almost a greenish blue in here. But as it goes up into here, it's more of a gray blue, and it has a little feeling of pink in there. And remember, we put pink in underneath here, and a little bit of pink and some yellow underneath of this area. So I think I should mix two batches of blue, one that is got a lot of ultramarine in it, which this area right here I had from a previous painting. It's quite gray right now. Do I want to keep that, or do I want to just pull that out of there? Start with something a little fresher. Let's just get rid of some of it. Sometimes dirty pan, especially if you know what's in the dirty pan, is a helpful base to start dulling something down a little bit, to neutralize, bring in those opposite colors to make things a little more gray. Now when we bring this ultramarine blue in here, we actually did need some of that gray in there to keep it from being too blue, because we do have a little pink in underneath of there, but that's still going to have to get neutralized a little bit. And remember, our best way to neutralize: opposite color on the color wheel, to bring in a little bit of this orange, get a little more of it. And there it is, grayed down a little bit. Don't want to gray it too much because it's going to get grayed some with what's happening up in there. And now for my cobalt blue, This had also been cobalt blue from previous painting. You get to know what you've had if you're working with your palette all the time, and you remember what you did last. So I'm just going to get rid of some of that, but not all of it. And now my cobalt blue is right here. Now remember, cobalt blue is not as dark in its natural state. It's straight out of the tube state, as ultramarine blue is. So when I need to go dark and get some really dark grays in here, we're probably going to need that ultramarine blue. Where in these lighter areas, I think the cobalt will probably work a little better. I'm letting this be a slightly dirty cobalt rather than an absolutely fresh, clean one. What I wanted to show you here, I'd started to do this, but it was in the middle of my brush going into cobalt, is I wanted to show you that ultramarine blue is darker than cobalt blue, and that cobalt was already a little bit dirty. Let me just, now that I've got it clean, let's get some of that out. And it's also slightly more toward the purple side. Cobalt slightly more toward the green side. So I think this cobalt is going to work pretty nice in here. And do I have enough? I have maybe a teaspoon of paint here. It's not a huge amount, but we're going to come in pretty wet. Do I need a bigger brush than this? What I've got here is a 12. I want to move up to my 18. I think so. I think I need to move up to that 18, but it's going to absorb more paint into it when I do it, so let's just make a little bit more paint. When you go to fill your brush with paint, it really pulls a lot in there. And pulling this off the side, trying to get as much back into my puddle as possible, because otherwise I'm going to lose all my paint into my water container. All right, so now get my 18 brush. This is an 11 by 14 that I'm working on, by the way, so you have some idea of how big this is. I want to wet this because, and do I want to wet the whole thing? I've got a light spot there that I can come up to. No, I think I'm going to do this controlled, which means I'm just going to wet down to the first clouds. I'm going to wet down to these first clouds here, and then I'll start feeding color into there. And with this big brush, it's really putting on quite a bit of water. And then it's going to feed through there and down into this a little bit, but we'll do more of that later. So now I still want this to be sort of a streaky sky, so I'm not filling this in entirely. I'm letting some of those little stringy bits show through here. And then we get that dark part of that cloud. And then this side of the, let's pull a little of that cobalt blue up into there as well. It's going pretty much dark onto there, but I'm leaving some little lighter spaces behind. So now we're going to come down into this other part where the blue is, and I'm just coming in with a little bit of dirty brush. I had that cobalt blue on it last, so this is bringing cobalt blue across through here. And that's going to work its way down into here. Now I've got to sort of stop pretty quick here and soften the edges of these, because otherwise I'm going to have hard lines where I just stopped. So clean this brush a little bit, dry it a little bit, and then we're going to just come in with a damp brush and pick up the edges of this. I want to still let some of that light stay behind, so I've got to be careful not to bring this too far into there. But with the damp brush, then it's going to feed out into a little thinner area. And if this feels like it's a little too much up here, I can come in with this damp brush and pick a little bit of this off of here to get some of that lighter feeling of those clouds up there. Now, this is a little too harsh here. Dried my brush again, just softening that edge. So basically what I'm doing when I'm softening the edge is I'm thinning the paint right there and pulling it up and into the next area with very, pretty much of a clean, almost dry brush. And now, before this gets too hard, and so I've got to do this sort of controlled and a little bit at a time, because it takes a little bit of time to come in and do this thinning, but if I wait too long on these edges, they're going to dry, and when they do, you're going to get a hard line there. So I'm wanting to just soften that. Soften that. Don't do too much at once. You, as an artist, have to sort of think about what your pace feels like and how quickly you feel you can work. And if you need to work slower, do less at a time so that you can control more of this. And this is my dark patch. And I'm going to have it angle up there just a little bit and angle down here a little bit. Now my hills are right in there. I can paint right behind those hills. It doesn't matter. Let's just use this cobalt blue. I think it'll be okay. Yeah, still making that dark enough. We're going to go even darker with those hills. Now my waterline, I could have put a tape here on this waterline, and I might be sorry I didn't, because I do want to keep that nice and clean there. I'll just come back in a minute, and now in cobalt blue it's going to be a little easier to lift that off. Now I want to soften the edges of these, pull that up into there a little bit, soften those edges, let some of that orange show through, but having it just a little bit dirtied by this. I'll bring that like that. And notice how this is a little bit greener in here, but I think that's going to be okay, because the closer that is to the sun, the more likely you're going to have a slightly greenish tone to this. The only way to keep that from being green is to come back in and do just a little bit of red, on there. It'll gray it right out. Now I have a little problem here, in that I came in up over my water line here, and these grays are going to come down into here. It's going to be fairly light right at that edge, but we are going to have grays that come down into this water, but it's not as intense. It's going to be lighter. It's going to be almost dry brush. I don't want it to come out here too far. That one little space is probably as much. It should be, yeah, right about there. And I'm just sort of dry brushing it, so some of those orange bits are going to show. I don't want too large pieces. Dry brush, and we're just keeping it parallel to the horizon as I do this. Dry brushing all the way down. Let's get it right off that edge. It's really easy to not get it off the edge where you should. And of course now, this is going to be a little harder to work on this side. I did the easy side first. I probably should have not, but that's okay. My head out of here. Maybe that'll help if I stand back just a little bit. Be careful to not do too much there. Just so I don't have to take this out of my brush, let me come in with one of my other brushes and do a little lifting here. This might even be a time to come in with that damp rag not a wet rag, but a very lightly damp rag. If it's too wet, you're going to get blossoms coming off of what you're doing with this lift, but a very lightly damp rag is just going to soften all of that. It's going to pick up those edges of things and just soften it. And I can get that little hard line out of there by softening with this damp rag. Even down in this water maybe just a little bit, because I might have gotten that a bit harsh at the top of that. Okay, so now we're going to continue with this blue down into the horizon here, and this can come up and into those hills because it's going to hide all of that. And once again, my blue doesn't come all the way over except for in a couple little tiny spots. But it is all the way out here into this edge. And the further you get down in here, the more there might be a wave that comes across through here. And let me see if I can do this. We're going to get just a little wave in there. All right, now that damp rag, if we don't like this, let's come in with that damp rag here again and just lift a little bit in this area because that feels a little too busy for that distance away. So I'm just going to soften all of that a little bit. Okay. And then a little bit more over in here. And what else needs to be done to get this feeling like it's right? I think we're pretty darn close. Maybe a little darker in a couple of spots there. And soften with my rag. Not too harsh feeling. I think we could come in with just a little bit of peachy color. Let me just get a little rose into this mixture that was my New Gamboge and red, and then I had put a little bit of blue in there to gray it down. And so I think that can end up, so these clouds, well, yeah, that's gonna be good. Those just felt like they were a little too green, and so I'm just coming in dry brush again. Dry brush. There wasn't quite enough orange underneath of that blue when I put the blues down. And let's break that up just a little bit, find the edge of that. And then I think we need soft rag on the edge of this. Maybe this can come down even a little further. Dry this brush a little bit, maybe that'll work. So just coming in with the edge of my brush to sort of pull that through. I'm liking that better. And maybe a little bit of that can come up into here. It's like, am I really at a position here where it's going to go down without causing the paint to move away too much? Oops, don't want that to go downward like that. That's not going to work. Okay. Step back, look at this a little bit. Maybe we can have a little bit of this peachy up in here. Damp rag to soften it. More blue in here to darken that down just a touch. I think I need to stop. So this is going to stop and dry, and then my last thing that will happen is that we will paint in these hills back in here, and if we want to put that bird in, we'll put the bird in, and then we'll see if I should do anything more with the waves in the front, or if they're okay the way they are. I have a feeling that we will end up wanting to do just a little bit more down in here. And just now that I pull this back a little and I can see that, yeah, I like this a little more purplish. Have those run right into some waves that are over there and into some waves that are over here. The closer these waves are to you, the more they can be less than straight. When they're really in the distance, they have to be parallel to the horizon. But once they come up into this close area, then they can be a little bit diagonaled. Careful with that, Margaret. It's easy, darn, you know. How did these guys actually keep beautiful straight lines on things? Okay. Doesn't run in there. And yeah, and then we can go a little bit darker over in this corner. So those waves work across. Maybe this corner needs to go a little darker. Photographers do a lot of this coming in and doing a little vignette in the corners. It can be a nice way to sort of tie the feeling in. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop. Sun's not right in the middle. It's not in the middle of that way. It's off just a little bit from that grid that, you know, my bullseye center is more like here somewhere. So I think this is going to work out pretty good. Let that dry, and then we'll come in and we'll do that final bit. Turn the painting sideways because it's much easier for me to paint along vertically than it is to paint horizontally. And then a couple other things that I'm noticing here is that where the sun is, this is a real red-brown here, and then it turns more of a neutral black the further that gets away on either side. Although all of it, well, especially this end here, still leans a little toward the red-brown side. This is pretty much a neutral black there. So mixing up, we're going to mix up a couple of batches. It's always hard. This is the reason that we mix our blacks. This particular project really shows us exactly what's going on. So I'm going to start with an orange. Remember, we're making our orange with quinacridone rose. And I need to make this thick. This has got to be the consistency of cream. If it's not that thick, it won't stay as black. It'll be gray. It won't be as dark as we need to go because our value here, let me pull a little value card onto here. So the value of that dark back there is right up here. In this area right here in the middle, it's probably value 3, and when we get out into those ends, you get right out to value 1. So we need a black. We need a red, brown, black, which is what I'm mixing right here, and then we're going to add blue into this. So we've been using cobalt and ultramarine blue, so I'm going to just stay with those colors. It makes a beautiful black. So with orange, opposite color on the color wheel, adding blue. So ultramarine blue into this orange. More blue than that. And then depending on the balance that we want for that red black, now this feels just a little bit too purple, so let me add a little more yellow to that. Is that what I want? No, I think it just needs more blue. Add more red to it. Add more yellow to it. Let's see what this color looks like. That color might actually be pretty good. I still feel like it needs just a touch more red in there just to get that real glow. So let me add a little more quinacridone rose to it. And then I'm going to make another pile which is much more neutral. Yeah, I think that's going to be a little bit better. It's hard to tell the difference, but I think that's going to be better. Now, let's start with burnt sienna. I haven't really done any burnt sienna. I said burnt sienna because I'm thinking burnt sienna. I'm starting with my ultramarine blue, but I'm thinking I might actually use burnt sienna because I can get this to black a little faster with the burnt sienna than using the orange. It has a little blue in it. No, I actually don't need a huge amount. It's not that big of an area that I'm going to be painting. So then let's add a little burnt sienna into this. Burnt sienna is a yellow brown, so I consider it to be in the yellow side of things. And in mixing blacks, I substitute it for my yellow in my mixture. So sometimes I end up having to put a little bit more red into here just to get the color I want. So let's add just a little more of the quinacridone rose in there. I think this is going to be good. So that's a brownie black. This is more of a neutral black. Yes, I think that's going to work. So now I'm going to dampen the area to start with, and dirty brush, don't clean it out completely, get it wet. Now I'm going to come back in and I'm going to see if I can actually see my lines on here from before. And before I do anything, let me make sure that this tape is absolutely tight here. Now, as I come in here, so we're going to start by just putting down some thinner paint because I want to wet this area so that the paint will move nicely in here. And so I'm looking at what is the top shape of those mountains, come in and finding this. And then I've had it come and drop down a little bit in here. Get a little more water on my brush because I want this to still be a little bit wet. And then we're going to load this with that really dark color that I've mixed up. And make that a little higher, and then maybe it dropped down. Find this last little mountain down here. Do we like those shapes? Sort of lost my lines in here, so who knows what I was originally planning. But we want a little interest to these shapes. Okay. And then come up a little bit at the end. Now, this red-brown is going to get loaded into this area right underneath of the sun. And as soon as I feel like it's thinning out when I put it down, I need to go back in and get more paint. And then I'm going to come into this darker paint, that black brown. And that's that black brown. And then it's going to come up into, find this. And maybe there's some little bumps on that hillside. Assume there's a tree or two somewhere over there. Just gotta be careful. Thought I was going to come in with a smaller brush, but I didn't need to. I was able to actually get this fairly nicely with this brush. Just get a little bumping in there just to give that some interest. Maybe keep it from being too much because it's quite a ways away. And make sure that those are there. Now I can pick this up and I can roll this just a little bit to make sure that these colors are moving through here. It's a little darker there. There's no lighter areas back behind there, so. And then I need to let this dry before I pull that tape off. And hopefully I got that tape down tight enough that we didn't end up with a problem. Now I did have a couple of spots on here that I was a little unhappy with when I looked at it later. In particular, let's get this, make sure this brush is really clean. There is a spot down in the water here. So there's a spot down in the water here where this is so far enough back there that I shouldn't have had that big of a line there. So what I want to do is just come in and get this lifted out of here. This all needs to be a little smoother in here. And maybe not come into that orange quite as strongly. So I'm just lifting that, softening that a little bit. And then come in here with my very slightly damp rag and wipe that out. Now I might find when I lift that tape up that I have to do a little lifting up above there too. And then I'm just going to work down in here a little bit more. And I want to soften the edges of some of these other wave streaks that I've got running through here. Make sure we don't have any lumpy, because the lines come pretty straight, but they've also got soft edges. So we're just going to soften that a little bit. And the rest of this is going to stay a little darker. So I'm going to I won't lift that back out of there. I'm just going to let that run through there. And then as it comes across here, these waves needed to be just a little bit lighter. I thought they were a little too dark, a little too big of a contrast between the two colors. You sort of have to decide which one are you staying with, and I might have to come in and put a little bit more yellow in there. Maybe this is a little too light in here. Let's let that, and then let's soften some of these. So just pulling some lighter areas across through here and lifting some of that dark out of there and making it not quite so dark. Have to be a little bit careful at coming up right up to that tape because I don't want to have a funny hard line in there. Oh, yeah, I'm liking that a little better. Sometimes you just overdo it and it's like, okay, I've got to come in and just lift a little bit to make this really work. And now, let's say this really should have a little bit more yellow right down in there. And actually it could have some orange in the bottom end of that. So let's just get some more yellow in here. And let's spread that right out into that orange on either side. Let's get New Gamboge down in here. Not quite so much. Okay. And then just a hint of peach. Just a hint of peach in here. Let that lie flat. And this, I know, I think I still need to wait. This actually needs quite a bit more drying before we can take that tape off. I'll go ahead and get that away. Don't have this 100% dry, but I'm thinking I can get this off of here now. I'm going to just sort of pull this up straight. Not winning with this, are you, Margaret? Okay, that's going to have to dry, and then I'm going to have to come back in and do a lift there at the bottom. I keep thinking I'm going to be able to do this with the tape, but I'm going to have to say the tape is not working for me. My other option on this was going to be to take something like a ruler and hold it along here so that I could see what that straight line was and then paint it in there. We really squeezed that down, but I guess there's just enough texture here that it's working around the tape. Okay. Okay, so we have a little fixing that we need to do. I always seem to have these fixes. There's a little bit of a silver lining in it, in that it does, looking in the photograph, it is just a little bit lighter here next to the mountains, and so when I go and lift, that's going to actually allow that to happen. So I'm not going to panic too much. The tape did not hold down as tight as I wanted it to, and so now I'm going to have to go through and do a little dry lift. And let's get a medium-sized brush here to do that with, a little dry lift where it bled through. Now what I do need to do is preserve my straight line. So I've got a piece of film, or not film, but plastic that would be a separator for a binder. And this is going to work pretty well to hold this without putting tape on there. I do have to hold it down with one hand, but this way I can protect the mountain area. A regular piece of heavy paper would work fine for this. So we're just coming in and dampening. And one nice thing about dark, and especially that combination that I had, it lifts pretty darn easy. I just have to have this consistent along here so that it looks natural, and it is going to give a little bit of a lighter area here. I think it's about time I rinse my brush, because now I'm seeing some dirty water coming out with this, and maybe lighten this just a little more down there so it's not just a single line there. Okay, rinse my brush, dry it halfway. Just want a damp brush. Now move into here. Actually, I don't need to have my little slant here. Let's just get this flat. It's going to be a little easier. Just wanting to hold this so my horizon stays nice and straight. And then before this dries, and I'm lifting just a little bit more out, I've got to come right back in with my damp, clean rag to finish lifting that. Clean that out. Gotta be careful here. We've got water coming in underneath of this. So one nice thing about doing something clear, I can sort of see where that water is coming in. But so I need to avoid having water underneath of here, because and maybe I didn't get that far enough up. There we go. And let me lift this, get that out of there, because I threw a little bit of bucky back down. Make sure this is nice and dry. Rinse that brush, dry it halfway, 1/2 to 3/4 way. Just a damp brush, not a wet brush. Pat that out. Do a little bit more. Pat that out. Lift this away, make sure that this is nice and dry and clean. Black lifts very, very easily. Not necessarily every bit of it, not 100%, but it's easy to turn it into gray. It's easy to get little smudgy marks in it. When you sharpen a photograph in the photo programs, it will frequently put a little thin pale line around something that you're sharpening to make it stand out from the background. And so this little tiny pale line here actually will make that horizon stand out even more. But there is, the sun comes down and through those clouds and hits that far area there. So you do get a light line there. It's not wrong. It's what really is there. Some of this can spread down into here just a little bit. I need to just lift that a bit more there. There's still a little more smudgy, dirty. This is the worst of it. If I come in with Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, it's going to make it too light. But this is a little lighter than what I want, so maybe I am going to have to come back in, see if I can find a little bit of this peachy color, and put peachy back in there. Okay. Lift that off. let's look at this and see if there's anything else that needs to be done to improve it. It's pretty darn close. And I like that I got this a little bit lighter in here so that my value difference between the dark and the light is not as great. It was looking a little wrong there. There is a few places down in here where it could have a little bigger value difference. But once again, I need to be careful about getting it too much. There's a little bit in here to make some of these waves work a little tiny bit more over on this side. Waves are like little mountains. They come up and they've got a high area, and then they've got little ridge lines that come off of there depending on how much wind was blowing and breaking that surface and turning it. The closer this is to you, the more you're going to see any diagonal lines. Out here in the far distance, you're not going to see any diagonals at all. Now, do I want to put that little bird in? I don't want him too dark. He's dark, but I don't want him too dark, but he's this red-brown. I don't want him too big either. He's somewhere right in here. It's a little V shape. A little V shape with a little tail coming off of there. There, leave him just like that. Little tiny bird. And he also has a little bit of a shadow underneath of him. Right under him pretty close. And he made a little dark line across the water there. Okay, I think I'd better stop. I'm going to put a signature on this. Once you figure you're done, that's time for the signature. And let's see, we'll use this red-brown. And not too thick. Yeah, that'll be good. And I want it up high enough so that when I put my mat on it, it won't be hidden. A little bit of that out of there because that M is much darker than the rest of it. And as you can see, as the paint runs out of my brush, I shouldn't be doing this. Okay. I think we're done. Finish.